I retired to Panglao in the Philippines on $1,200 a month. 12 months later, I was broke. For the first few months, it actually worked. Cheap rent, cheap food, mornings with nothing to do but drink coffee and watch the tide come in. The kind of slow, simple life I'd been chasing for the last 40 years without ever admitting it out loud. Then, somewhere around month 6, the math quietly stopped adding up, and by month 12, my savings were gone, I couldn't afford a plane ticket home, and the life I thought I'd built turned out to have never really been mine to begin with.
This is what happened to me, and how a simple, honest retirement plan slowly turned into something I couldn't climb back out of. I was 66 when I finally stopped working, not because I wanted to. My knees and my lower back had been sending me warnings for years, and eventually my body just stopped negotiating. For 41 years, I'd been a maintenance technician at a bottling plant outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. Same conveyor belts, same 3 a.m. shift changes, same hum of machinery that followed me home even on my days off. In my 30s, that steadiness had felt like security. By my late 50s, it had started to feel like a sentence. The math never worked in my favor. Social Security plus a tiny private pension from the plant came out to just about $1,200 a month. Rents on my one-bedroom apartment in Albuquerque alone ran $950. That left me next to nothing for groceries, gas, insurance co-pays, and absolutely nothing for anything unexpected. I had $27,000 saved, 41 years of work, and that number was the whole of it. At the rate I was going, I could survive. I could not live. And some nights, lying awake doing the math over and over, one thought kept circling back. If this is it, what exactly was all of it for? That's when YouTube found me. Late nights half asleep, thumb scrolling, and slowly the algorithm started feeding me something different. Retire abroad, retire in the Philippines, live well on half of what you're spending now. For the first few weeks, I felt like I'd stumbled onto a secret, a full meal for less than $2, a tricycle ride across town for pocket change, rent that didn't sit on my chest like a weight every first of the month. I started running numbers in my head constantly. If a day cost me $25, that was still cheaper than one dinner out back home. If I kept my spending under $30 a day, I could land comfortably under $900 a month and bank the rest. For a while, on paper anyway, it actually worked out that clean. I even let myself think, if I can hold this pace, $27,000 might stretch 10 years, maybe longer. That thought alone, not just surviving but having time again, was something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. I spent almost 4 months deep in expat Facebook groups and forums before I committed to anything. Rent for $200 to $300, meals for $1.50, transportation for almost nothing, and every single post seemed to agree on one thing: live simply, and $1,200 a month goes a long way here. So I made the call, not carefully, not after some methodical plan, but out of a mix of exhaustion and hope. I sold most of what I owned, packed one duffel bag, and booked a one-way ticket to Bohol. Panglao hit me like a wall the moment I stepped off the plane. The heat first, thick and immediate, the kind that soaks through a shirt before you've even found your luggage. Then the noise, tricycles, roosters, someone's karaoke machine 3 streets over. Overwhelming, and underneath the overwhelm, something that felt almost like excitement. My first place was a small studio set back from the beach road, no hot water, ceiling fan instead of air conditioning most nights. 14,000 pesos a month, just over $230. My landlord's sister, a woman named Nanay Courting, did my laundry twice a week for 1,600 pesos a month, about $26. And within 2 weeks, she'd learned exactly how I liked my shirts folded without me ever once explaining it. Electricity, running a small window unit only at night to sleep, came to about 4,200 pesos, roughly $70. Water was next to nothing, 400 pesos, about $7. A prepaid data plan for my phone ran 1,000 pesos, about $16, since the studio didn't have its own internet line. Groceries and cheap Carinderia meals together came to about 11,000 pesos, close to $181. And my blood pressure medication, the same prescription that had cost me nearly $130 a month back in Albuquerque, even with my Medicare copay, ran me 2,500 pesos here, about $41. Added up, rent, nanny courting, electricity, water, data, food, medication, and my full monthly cost of living landed just under $600. Against $1,200 coming in, that left me with more breathing room in a single month than I'd had in the last 15 years combined. For the first time since I could remember, I wasn't falling behind. I was finally getting ahead. For about a month, I tracked every peso obsessively. Then I didn't need to anymore because the numbers kept working, and relief, when you haven't felt it in a long time, has a way of making you stop asking questions. Underneath the relief, though, something else was quietly building. The days were long, really long. I didn't speak Cebuano. I knew almost no one. People were friendly, warm even, but everything stayed on the surface. Good morning, sir. Same order, sir. Nothing that went any deeper. My routine flattened into the same loop. Wake up early, eat alone. Walk the beach road until the heat got unbearable. Sit in the air-conditioned lobby of a resort I wasn't staying at, just to feel cool air for an hour. Go home. Repeat. At first the quiet felt peaceful. No alarm clocks, no supervisor, no deadlines. After a few weeks, it stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling like a room with no door. That was when I started going to a small beachfront eatery most evenings, run by a heavy-set, good-natured man everyone called Kuya Jun. And that was where I met Rizza. She waited tables there 6 nights a week, sending most of what she earned back to her mother and 2 younger siblings inland. It started small. She remembered my order before I finished ordering it. San Miguel, extra cold, no glass. She asked how my day was and actually waited for the answer. After months of being invisible, being remembered by name felt like being handed something I didn't know I'd been starving for. We started spending time together outside of Kuya Jun's, slow walks along the beach road, cheap dinners at other people's carinderias. She listened, really listened, when I talked about the plant, about 40 years of the same shift bell, in a way nobody back home ever had the patience for. It made me feel, for the first time in years, like a person instead of a routine. The first time I helped her, it barely registered as a decision. Her youngest sibling needed medicine, about $100 worth. Compared to what I used to spend on nothing back in Albuquerque, that felt like pocket change, and the gratitude that came back, the way her whole face changed when she thanked me, hit something in me that had gone quiet a long time ago. It didn't feel like a pattern yet. It felt like separate, reasonable moments. Help with the hospital bill, help with the niece's school fees, help covering a shortfall in rent one month. Each one on its own sounded almost responsible. Each time, I told myself the same thing. This is temporary. Next month will be lighter. Next month was never lighter. It just arrived with a new reason attached. By month 5, my spending had crept from $600 to $900. By month 7, it crossed $1,100, close to everything I had coming in. I noticed, somewhere in the back of my mind, that the emergencies always seemed to land right after my pension deposit cleared. I noticed, and I chose not to look at it directly. Once, over dinner, I finally said something, gently, just asking questions. Her face changed instantly, hurt, almost wounded. "You think I'm lying to you?" she said quietly. That was the moment my voice nearly broke, just telling it. I backed off immediately, not because the doubt disappeared, but because losing her felt like a bigger risk than losing the money. Somewhere in there, the visa paperwork became its own quiet nightmare. Without enough savings left for the SRRV deposit, I'd been writing tourist visa extensions the whole time. Regular trips to the Bureau of Immigration office in Tagbilaran, fees that crept up the longer I stayed, forms that changed slightly every time I showed up. One trip, the power went out across half the island for 6 hours in the middle of a tropical storm, and I sat in my dark studio, sweating, using half my phone battery just to keep a fan of paperwork photographs from getting lost. And there were smaller things that caught me off guard too. I missed, oddly specifically, the smell of green chili roasting on street corners back home every September. I'd find myself staring at videos of it at 2 in the morning, homesick for a smell I used to complain about. I have a daughter back in New Mexico, Michelle, and a set of grandkids I'd met maybe 4 times in my life. We weren't close, hadn't been in years, mostly out of distance and pride on both sides. Still, some nights I'd scroll through her Facebook page just to watch my grandson's Little League highlights, or my granddaughter's school play, secondhand, 3 thumbnails deep, never once calling to say I'd seen them. By month 10, my savings had dropped under $5,000. I finally told Rizza I needed to slow down, be more careful for a while. Almost overnight, everything changed. The calls thinned out. The dinner stopped. Kuya Jun mentioned, almost offhand one evening, that she picked up more shifts at a different resort across the island. Just like that, the one person who'd made the days feel shorter was gone, and I was alone again, except this time without the money to start over. By month 12, my account held less than what a one-way flight home actually cost. That was when Michelle finally called, after weeks of me not answering. Something in my voice must have scared her, because 2 weeks later, she was standing outside my studio apartment with a suitcase and a face that had clearly been crying on the flight over. She didn't yell. She just stood in the doorway of that small hot room, looked at the bare walls, the single fan, my shoulders, thinner than she remembered, and said the one thing that undid me completely. "Dad, why didn't you just tell me it got this bad?" I didn't have an answer that made me look good. The truth was, admitting it meant admitting the math had been wrong from the very beginning, and that the one thing I couldn't calculate, the need to matter to somebody, had cost me almost everything I'd spent 41 years building. These mornings now, I wake up in a smaller room further inland, away from the beach road, where rent runs less than half of what I first paid. I count what's left in my wallet before I even make coffee. I still hear the roosters. I still watch the heat settle over the street by mid-morning. But I understand something now that none of those videos ever told me. Surviving is one number, living is another, and mistaking one for the other can cost you everything you thought you'd already paid for.